Okay, so if you ever go to St. Louis, if you're watching this, everything we might talk about could be of no consequence whatsoever. Here's your one thing. If you go to St. Louis, go to a place called the Shaved Duck and get their burnt tips there. Now, for people in the north, they don't know what burnt tips are. Like, we literally don't know what burnt tips are. Go to the Shaved Duck in downtown St. Louis and get the burnt tips and the gooey butter cake. And trust me, it will be the best meal you've ever had in your entire life. And if you don't know what gooey butter cake is or burnt tips, you're not from St. Louis, Missouri. It is the best food ever. Seriously.
What Brian says is very true. And with that, welcome LabCoatAgents to another bi-weekly webinar of the State of the Month. And we just plugged St. Louis. So for those of you who know St. Louis, give us a little love. We don't usually get a lot of it. It started with Brian asking about baseball bats, and I said that's like all we have here in St. Louis is baseball. So, but we also have some pretty good food. So
I love the Rams.
Oh, sorry. Stick the knife in. That's terrible. You're terrible. Well, welcome back, Brian. It's good to have you back. Brian Stevens is joining me once again, and we've got three count 'em topics that we're gonna talk about today. Number one. Are millennials ripe for the picking right now? That was just a topic discussed on the National Real Estate Post today. So we're going to dive into that. We're going to see what Spencer Raskoff is up to. You might remember he had kind of a prominent role at Zillow, and now he is getting back into the real estate game. And then lastly, good old Rocket Mortgage is partnering with Realtor.com. So we're going to tell you something about that. Brian, where do you want to start?
It's up to you, man. It's up to you.
Let's start with the Raskoff thing. I think that's interesting.
Okay, so Spencer Raskoff came up with an idea that me and Frank, off the cuff, thought was a good idea. And frankly, we're still kind of on the wire on the whole thing. So if you know anything about timeshares, they're ridiculous because the idea behind a timeshare is to get you to buy something that sounds like a good idea, off the cuff. But then once you get it, with your maintenance fees and the cost associated with it and the time that you get, it becomes kind of a ridiculous thing. In fact, the industry for getting people out of timeshares is as big as getting people into timeshares. And when you have like an equilibrium in that sort, you know that the industry is not good. However, we all collectively like the idea of owning something that is outside of our backyard. Like you in St. Louis might want to come down to burn down Napa, where I live. Or I might want to go to, the hills of in North Carolina. So Spencer came up with the idea of pairing people together and having them actually own a house together. So it's not a timeshare with maintenance fees and all that stuff, but it's where you just own the house with other people. So I was thinking, like, I would love to go up to Tahoe, which is 2.5 hours away from me. I can't spend $1 million on a house. But if I had, 5 partners and we were each spending $200,000 and we owned the house and owned our interest in that house, and I can go up there and go snowboarding and, mountain bike riding, well, that would make perfect sense to me. So the whole thing off the cuff made perfect sense. Now, he's somebody who's got a really great pedigree because he was a CEO of Zillow, and so you assume he kind of understands what he's talking about. And in fact, he does. And so I have no doubt whatsoever that he's going to be able to pair the right people to buy these houses together. And then you actually own it. You don't have maintenance fees, and you can go to your vacation home. And you don't have to own this, as a joint tenant. You can own this as a sole proprietor, and you can sell your interest in it. Here's my question. So the cost for what this joint venture is going to be, if you wanted to buy a house in a vacation area around you or wherever you wanted to buy it, the cost of the joint venture is going to be 10%. So if I'm buying $1 million house, it's going to cost me $100,000. Like if you're going to buy a $100,000 house, it's going to cost you $10,000. That's what their fee is going to be. Now, Frank says, I love the idea. And I'm saying, I think the cost, for the invitation is too much. I think 10% is too high. Because I'm looking at a house, if it's $500,000, do I want to spend $50,000 for somebody to basically do, a version of Match.com with somebody else who wants to buy a house in that area? What do you think about it? Is 10% too much?
Well, so first of all, explain to me what the benefit of what they're doing is. Like, where's the value? Where do they bring the value?
Okay, so you live in St. Louis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I live in Northern California, outside of Napa. Let's say you and your wife wanted to buy a house in Napa because you love wine. Well, do you have $1 million like that you can piss away? Well, probably not. But what if I were to come to you and say, well, I'll go in it with you. And so now your $1 million is 500,000. After all, you're not going to spend the entire year in Napa. You're going to spend, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks out there. Well, if you're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks, and I am going to, then why don't we find like 4 or 5 other couples, and then why don't we just buy this house collectively? And so rather than you spending $1 million or 500,000, you're spending 150,000, and you actually own that as tenants in common. So you have a 10% stake in that, and then out of the 52 weeks in the year, you're going to get 5 or 6 weeks, and you and your wife can come out here and you can do whatever the hell you want to do. Like, that makes sense. And what you're not getting is you're not getting the maintenance fees that you're going to get when you're buying into a timeshare. Like, a timeshare is a scheme. It really honestly is. It's a scheme. For people who don't see that, they're probably people who like sell Monavi and like Amway and shit like that. You're actually buying into a house and a property. So that would make sense for me and you to do this, provided me and you got along. Now, what if me and you bought a house together and all of a sudden I become a psychopath? You know, and I decide that the whole house has to be painted black on the inside, purple on the outside. Well, that becomes a problem for you because you don't think that's a really good decorative design. So this company comes in and it pairs people who get along, who have the same interests. They actually decide on what the decor is going to be. They manage that decor, so I can't paint the place black and purple. And so you have your 10% stake or $100,000 in $1 million place in Napa is going to be protected to a certain extent. And then after you buy the place free and clear, then you actually own that and you don't have to pay the maintenance fee outside of what your gardening is going to be. So it's like a timeshare that you actually own. You can't really swap it with other places, though be it you could probably put it on an Airbnb and you could take your shares and you could do that type of thing. But they have parameters in place that ensures that your owner interest is going to be protected. And that kind of makes sense to me. I would use another example for you. I would go to like the Lake of the Ozarks where you live. Mm-hmm. You know, I've been out to the Ozarks. And by the way, don't just get gooey butter cake. Don't just get burnt tips if you go to St. Louis. If you're in St. Louis and you have the opportunity, go out to the Ozarks. It is the 8th natural wonder of the world, and I'm not kidding you. Most people don't know this, but did you realize that the Ozarks have more shorefront than the entire country? Because the lakes go like this.
Mm-hmm. It's a snake.
And the lake and like the entire Ozarks, it's a remarkable place in the world to be. So I would like to go out to the Ozarks. I would like to buy a place out there, but truth be told, going to the Ozarks for me is a very difficult thing to do. I have to go from Oakland, San Francisco, or Sacramento, flying to St. Louis, drive 2 hours, and then I'm there. So I can only do this once or twice per year. So me owning a house year round, in fact, when I can't take care of the house, would not make sense. But once or twice a year, I would absolutely love to do that. So if I could have somebody who could facilitate that relationship and actually give me ownership where my ownership is protected, along with what I believe a house should be, well, then that makes perfect sense. So the idea behind what Spencer Raskoff is doing is great. He's got the right pedigree. This whole thing makes perfect sense. It's way better than a timeshare. But my question to you, my friend, is 10% too much?
I still don't understand where their value is, so no. Because I guess the value, based on what I took from that, is they are doing the job of pairing you with other like-minded or like wealthy people that are well-to-do but not super well-to-do, and they will fill the gap to allow you to do this. And I get it. It does make I get it. It makes sense because you buy a house, you're only going to use it so much. But so here's how I think. If I'm going to do that, I'd go find my own partner to do it with, and I would buy it as an investment property. I'd use it when I wanted to use it, but then we would Airbnb it 75 or 90% of the year.
Okay. Well, you're making certain assumptions about yourself. One is you have the wherewithal to find the person. Okay. It's Match.com.
True.
It truly is. Two, you have the finances to make this happen as well. What about the person who has that dream idea of owning a place in the Bahamas? But I don't know anybody who lives in the Bahamas, and perhaps they're going to pair me with somebody who's over in France or Italy or, in Phuket. It doesn't really matter where it is. They've got a database. And here's what realtors really need to understand. And I'm going to go in the weeds on this one for a couple of seconds. But the reason why sites like, Zillow and, Realtor.com, and they have the databases of people, and they know what they're looking for because they put cookies on their computers and they know what they're searching. So you might know 5 or 6 people, but when you jump into a site that Spencer Raskoff, who was the ex-CEO of Zillow, and he's got 62 million people who hit that site on a monthly basis, and he is undoubtedly going to be tapping into that resource, is you might know 2 people. Spencer's coming to you and saying, hey, listen, Brian, I know 65 million people who are interested in the same thing. I'm going to put a filter on these 65 million people and find out exactly what they're looking for. And I'm going to pair you with the absolutely perfect person. Because listen, dude, you might want to do this like with your best friend Jethro or my best friend Dave. But the problem with Dave is Dave is really great 2 weeks, per year, but I fight with him 10 weeks per year. Perhaps I would be better off owning a property with somebody who is not my best friend. And that's what they bring to the table. They bring a database to the table of people who are outside of your sphere or your ecosystem of influence, and they say, this is going to be a better match for you. And then in the event where something is not working right with you and your partner on this property that you purchased, they've got parameters in place that they're going to hold true to ensure that somebody's not going to paint the interior of that house black and the exterior purple. So, I mean, it's a really great idea. So me and Frank, like we're like a couple of old Bettys working here. We've been married for like 15 years, and this is what we do every day. We fight about real estate. Frank is like a total proponent. I'm something of an opponent about this. And the only thing that differentiates me and Frank on this whole thing is what the cost of it is. The idea is sound. Nobody has done this. He has found like a spot in real estate that makes perfect sense because you're not buying into a timeshare. You're actually buying into a house. You own the house and you are tenants in common in the house. But the difference between me and Frank is they're charging 10%. And again, if you're buying a house for $1 million, I don't know if I want to spend $100,000 for somebody to match me. I think at that point, I'd rather find a couple of friends locally who share my same, ideals and ideas about decor and about how we're going to deal with stuff. I think I would rather do that than spend $100,000 on, somebody to manage my relationship.
Well, it sounds like he's got a monopoly here. If he's the only one with the idea, he can charge whatever he wants. And if people are, if you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice.
Well, isn't that what it really comes down to? Isn't it really like, here, I have to concede this point. The point is this: if he can charge 10% and this whole thing works, then clearly I'm wrong. If he can't do that, then clearly I'm right. And this is the great thing about a free market society, is he's going out with an idea. He's got his money behind the programming. He definitely has a database. He's going to be tapping into what Zillow is doing. There's no doubt about that. And he's going to throw this against the wall. And if it works, then he's right. It is a free market society.
Yeah. 100%. It's interesting. It's very interesting. When is more information coming out about this so we can keep an eye out?
It's going to be coming out in the next few months. The idea is being floated right now. But if you know anything about Zillow, here's what I can tell you for sure. And this is based on a 10-year track history of these guys. Like, if they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. And that's why we need to listen closely. So in the next few months, as a realtor or a lender, oh, and by the way, from a real estate standpoint, this is kind of something that you can actually use to your benefit if you so choose to do it. Is if you have a client who's looking at buying a second house, but they don't necessarily have like enough money, they'll pay you a 3% commission. They're going to tap it on top of the 10% that they're charging. So then the fee becomes 13%. Now, again, if I'm buying something, on the Lake of the Ozarks, and it's going to be $125,000, and I've got a $1,200 fee, and now you're going to tack another $500 on for a real estate agent who's going to find the place. like that becomes a reasonable fee for me to pay. Like from my standpoint, it's when you're looking at the $1 million houses where the fee needs to be kind of negotiated.
It's always relative, man, based on the volume. That's for sure.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, let's move forward. Rocket Mortgage, Realtor.com. Tell us about it.
All right. Well, this one's evil. Me and Frank are in agreement on this whole thing. So Realtor.com is just signed an agreement with Rocket Mortgage, and we know Rocket Mortgage is an extension of Quicken. And so anybody who is going onto Realtor.com is going to be able to get a quote on their mortgage from Rocket Mortgage. And Rocket Mortgage is going to allow somebody to take their phone and go ahead and plug their stuff in and see if they can go ahead and get qualified. Now, as a real estate agent, if you're watching this right now, I want to tell you a term that every lender in the country knows. It's called buyers are liars. Now, I can work, and here's how we know this to be true, okay? The fact that we ever had stated income loans in this country, a true form of stated income loans that absolutely failed, is proof and money in your pocket that buyers are in fact liars. So if I work at Denny's, I'm not an executive chef over at, the Shaved Duck in St. Louis, Missouri that has the best burnt chips on the face of the planet and the gooey butter cake. No, I'm not somebody who's making $150,000 a year creating a masterpiece of food that you're going to eat and pay a premium for if I'm working at Denny's and I'm making moon over my hammy, okay? I'm making $7 an hour. I'm not making $150,000 per year. And so when a consumer is going to put their information into their phone and talk about what they're making, everybody is catching a fish this big. That's a complication which is going to prove this thing to be erroneous in and of itself. But the second part of it is, as a real estate agent, you have to understand that your local lender that you're currently working with, that person who's currently in your market, should be helping you with your marketing to ensure that not only is somebody going to get the best rate, that's possible to them, but they're also going to get the best product that's available to them. A local lender is better than that than Rocket Mortgage. And when a local lender and a local real estate agent close a deal, what they're doing is they're ensuring that those commissions are going to stay in your community, and a lender and a real estate agent are going to invest money in their community by how they spend their money, by going to local restaurants, by getting their dog groomed at the right place, and all of these type of things keep money in your community. They keep wealth in your community, and they keep your community strong. So not only working with a local lender is going to be better for you, and working with a local real estate agent is going to be better for you, but it's going to help your community. And we need to start to really understand this. We buy locally, we eat locally, we grow locally. We need to real estate and lend locally too, because these are bigger ticket items. And when you buy a house, you're putting $25,000 on average back into your community. When you work with a company like Rocket Mortgage, who's now paired with Realtor.com, they're going to strip mine your community of that type of wealth. And that's really an unhealthy thing for your community. It's just not a good thing. So Realtor.com right now is working with Rocket Mortgage, which is going to be Quicken, and they're doing this for personal wealth, and all of that money is going to be shared with their shareholders. Now, as a realtor, on a very rudimentary level, I want you to understand this. You have a fiduciary. How do you spell it?
Fiduciary?
No. I'm just in general. It's like we use this term and we don't really understand what it means. A fiduciary is a legal and moral obligation to put your client's interest above yourself. This is a massively important thing. I wish we would talk more about the whole term fiduciary. Like, you have a moral and legal obligation to represent the best interest of that person, even above and beyond your own personal interest. It's not about your commission. It's about representing them like a lawyer would, or like a doctor would. These are the things that we need to start looking at a little bit more closely. So your fiduciary as a realtor is to put your client's legal and moral obligation above your own in your local community. Understand this. When you're dealing with a company like Realtor.com, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and it is a media conglomerate, and you're working with a company like Quicken, and by the way, I'm a big fan of Quicken in certain aspects, but not all aspects. But the people at Quicken, they have a legal and moral obligation to their shareholders, not your client. So the fiduciary is ass over tea kettle when you're looking at this. So when you work with a lender who is not local, your lender has a moral and legal obligation to that client who's in front of you. When you're working with a retail branch like Quicken, they have a legal and moral obligation to their shareholders. So your local lender has a obligation professionally, morally, and legally to give them the best rate, the best terms, and the best loan humanly possible. And we've got 7 authoritarian representative governmental agencies who are going to ensure that your lender, your local lender, is meeting all of those obligations. However, when you work with a company like Quicken, they have a legal, ethical, and moral obligation to make as much money as humanly possible for their shareholders. So if your local lender has to get the best loan for your client, which is going to be the cheapest loan, when you're working with a company like Quicken on a retail level, they have a legal, moral, ethical obligation to screw that same person, that same client, as much as humanly possible so they can maximize the profits for their shareholders. So when I hear Realtor.com, who is supposed to represent the best interests of your local buyers and sellers, and they're pairing with a company who's got a legal, moral, and ethical obligation to represent the best interests of their shareholders, it's kind of like drinking orange juice and eating chocolate at the same time. It doesn't work. So if there's one thing that I could say to local real estate agents, when you hear these type of things, whenever you spend your money, you're voting. You're essentially voting. So if you're buying leads from sites like Realtor.com and they're supporting companies like Quicken on endeavors like this, you're supporting things that are actually demonstrative to your local community. I'm going to pull back out of this whole conversation and say this very clearly. So if that's a conflict, what is a resolution? The resolution is very clear on this. Work with a local lender. You will get a better deal. Their legal, moral, and ethical fiduciary is going to be in the right spot. It's going to help your clients. It's going to keep more money in your community. And without sites like Zillow and Realtor.com, understand this, real estate will in fact sell. We don't need to give them money and strip mine our communities of their local wealth.
I agree. And to summarize everything that you just mentioned, Realtor.com is doing this for one reason. They're going to say that it's convenience. It's simple. Yes, but that's how they're going to spin it to realtors that, sure, hey, they're going to already come pre-approved. The reality is I've had several realtors bring this to me all over the country saying, what do you think about this? And my answer is simply, it's no different than what's already been going on. Number one, most of those local lenders also have the ability for your borrowers to apply right from their phone. And if they don't, I'm not saying lose the lender, but maybe you should suggest to them, get with the times, because most lenders have that. So just get it. That way I can easily overcome that objection. And number two, yes, like I told the realtors that reached out to me, I'm like, listen, who do you want your client going to for their mortgage? Who do you trust? The answer is the guy or gal you've been working with for years. So it's very simple. You just simply tell them, listen, that's great that you have this, but I want you to talk to my guy because your Quicken loan officer is based out of Ohio or Detroit, and they're not in my market. I want you to work with somebody that you can shake their hand and, wring their neck if you have to. And it's really not, to me, it's not that big of a deal. This really comes down to convenience. We all have it. If your mortgage company doesn't have it, they should go get it, and you should delicately suggest they go get it. There's tons of apps out there that they can now subscribe to, or online, all that stuff, right? Well, I don't think this is that big of a deal.
I kind of want to divert this conversation real quickly, if you're okay with it, is, when we look at the whole idea of having a tech company, so technology used to be an industry in and of itself. Like you have medicine, you have sales, you have, assembly, and then you had technology. But like nobody is going into assembly and saying, I can make technology better. Nobody is going into assembly and saying, I can make medicine better. Technology has become that standalone industry that is insidiously going into every single industry and saying, I can make what you do better. Mm-hmm. Now, in some cases, they can. I mean, we'd be fools to say that they can't. But it doesn't mean because you can make me buying a ticket online going from San Francisco to San Diego, or from you going to Kansas City, Missouri to St. Louis, Missouri cheaper, by going to Expedia, or because I can buy a pair of shoes cheaper on Amazon, it doesn't mean that it is collectively all-encompassing better for every component of every industry in the world. And in fact, it's not. But what these technology companies are doing right now, and this is just a trend, is they're going into different industries and they're preying on the fact that you can buy shoes cheaper online than with your local retailer. And they're saying, because you can buy those shoes cheaper online with Amazon, therefore, buying a car, having a vacation, which is going to be 2 weeks overseas to maybe going to Europe, or buying or selling a house online is going to be a better experience for you. And in fact, that technology doesn't always make things better, faster, and cheaper. What we're finding is that it actually, in fact, makes it more expensive. So when you look at a company like Quicken, I actually don't begrudge Quicken whatsoever. In fact, I know Dan Gilbert personally. I was actually out there testing Quicken or testing Rocket Mortgage before it became a product that was presented to the masses. So they do a lot of things good, but understand when you're working with a company like this, you're not dealing with a loan officer, you're dealing with an assembly line. Are we there?
Yeah.
Okay. You're dealing with an assembly line. And you as a purchaser of a house that's going to be $200,000 to $300,000, you're a line item on a spreadsheet. You're not an actual person who you might see in the local grocery store. So because they have an assembly line approach, and because they spend massive amounts of money on advertising. Now, I'm a sports fan. You must be a Cardinals fan out there in St. Louis.
Good guess.
I'm a Giants fan. We missed the playoffs by one day. But if you watch any sports, Quicken Loans is all over the place. It's Quicken Theater, it's Quicken Stadium, it's Quicken this. When you watch commercials, it's Quicken, Quicken, Quicken. They're spending not millions, but billions of dollars on advertising. And that's to get your consumers to go use them because they believe as disruptors, they're going to be a better, cheaper, faster alternative because they have this thing called technology. When in fact, when you put your name on a stadium, it's going to cost you multi-millions of dollars to do. When you're putting commercials out on a national level on every sports show that you see or arena, or when you're listening to the radio, we still do that sometimes, right? And we see Quicken all over the place. All of the money that they're spending there, all of that money, every single penny of that money makes its way, it trickles down to a rate sheet, and your consumer is going to pay for it. So when I look at like the Cleveland Stadium with Quicken over there, when I see Quicken on there or Rocket Mortgage or whatever the hell it is, when I see that over there, what I think personally is every person who is getting a loan right now is financing the cost of that sign over the next 30 years in the form of their mortgage, in the form of a higher interest rate. So we just getting back to where we started from, as a real estate agent, when we see that Realtor.com is pairing with Rocket Mortgage, they're doing this for money. When we look at Quicken and what they're doing on a retail level, they're doing this for money because they have the legal, moral, and ethical obligation to their shareholders. They're going to spend money where they think it's due. They're going to make as much as humanly possible. And when they spend that money, it's going to come in the form of a higher interest rate. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, when you work with a local lender who doesn't have this high overhead and has a legal, moral, and ethical obligation to your client, your local community, it's going to be cheaper, better, and faster. When you work with one of these massive conglomerates, they're going to strip mine your community of those funds. They're going to take that money. They're going to charge your clients a higher interest rate, and that money is going to be diverted outside of your local community.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And I think at the end of the day, I still think relationships mean more than anything anyway. And I think most good realtors will agree with that. And, some of you probably experienced the national lenders, and some have probably had solid experiences, and some have had nightmare experiences. And you just have to learn as you go through it. I have these conversations with realtors all the time, especially newbies. Like, what should I expect when I'm working with that big national bank? Well, I can tell you what I've heard, but I would be just acting like a biased lender if I told you that they're terrible. And so I'm going to say, go try it out and see how it works. And then you'll learn for yourself. But like Brian said, it is a shareholder thing. It is a stock thing. Jeff Biddles is chimed in and about, I think Jeff, actually, Brian was talking about realtors having a fiduciary responsibility, and it's more of a figure of speech than it is an actual agreement. I think as a lender and as a realtor, we should feel like we have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients, and we do. Does that mean that we have to give them the absolute lowest rate? No, because our time and our service is worth something. It's the same for both of us. But we do have a responsibility to take care of them and give them the best experience, which includes the right program for them, which includes a good competitive rate. Go ahead.
Actually, I will politely disagree with you.
Ooh, good.
You
Yes.
have a legal obligation to give your client the best loan. You do. And if you don't do it, it's this thing called redlining. And they're going to use HMDA data, and they're going to find out if you're giving certain data points and certain loans better to specific groups within your community. So you living in St. Louis, you've got an incredibly diverse culture. But they're all drawn down railroad lines, aren't they? So you actually do have that. But here's what you said, which is so factually accurate. Sometimes the lowest rate is not necessarily the best deal. It really isn't. Like a 5-1 ARM, a 7-1 ARM, a 3-1 ARM, a down payment assistance program, a bond money. These are all complications that a lender has to look at. And so a lender does have an obligation, a legal obligation, that's going to be looked at by 7 regulatory agencies to make the best decision. And the best decision, here's where I love what you just said here, is it doesn't necessarily have to be the lowest rate. It has to be the best product and program for that person. And it requires somebody who understands their local market and understands the different products within that local market to make the best decision for their client. And I will tell you this, I know lenders across the country. I mean, there's probably nobody who knows more lenders around the country than me. And I'm not patting myself on the back.
True.
But I spent the past decade flying around the country, talking to people and understanding local markets. And I understand the mortgage market fairly well. And I like, for instance, I think I know more mortgages as well as you. Okay.
Probably better.
However, I don't understand the St. Louis market as well as you do. I don't know what your local bond programs are. In fact, I think there are bond programs that are multi-state with you. I think you have bond programs that go outside of Missouri, and I think they might go up to Illinois. I mean, I think that you, and they might go to Kansas. I think that you have different, and I'm pretty sure about this. I think that you have options and alternatives that I simply would never understand.
Sorry about that, guys. We got kicked off. Somebody jumped in and didn't tell us and booted us out. That's how Zoom works. So now I'm waiting on Brian to come back in, and we'll restart this conversation. We'll jump right into the millennials piece of it. It looks like people are coming back on. I know Brian wants to get back on and argue with me, so I'd be surprised if he doesn't show back up. So the other topic that we were going to discuss, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it because we are back recording, is our millennials ripe for the picking now? Well, you know what? Let me finish what we were just talking about, where Brian and I were I don't know if you want to call it arguing about the fiduciary responsibility. I think you guys get the point, though, about what we were talking about with Rocket Mortgage and Realtor.com and using a local lender. Listen. It's up to each individual person. Here comes Brian. Brian, I was just wrapping up the Rocket Mortgage conversation so we could jump over to the millennials piece. You were in mid-sentence, so if you wanted to finish that off, fire off.
In summary on the whole thing, Realtor.com is working with Rocket Mortgage. And as a realtor, you can spend your time, your money, your energy, and your resources where you choose to. And I would say choose it wisely. Work with a local lender, because when you're working with a company like Realtor.com that's supporting a company like Rocket Mortgage, they take money out of your community, they charge your clients a higher interest rate, and they have a fiduciary legal, moral, and ethical obligation outside of what your local lender has, which is to their shareholders. Just work with a local lender. And I'll tell you this, as a real estate agent or a lender out there, for a local lender or realtor to be successful, we're not talking about massive numbers on spreadsheets. We're talking about dealing with 2, 3, or 4 people a month. As a local real estate agent, if you can list a couple of houses, get a couple of buyers, and get to know people in your community, you're going to kick ass, and you're going to you're going to be able to live very comfortably in that community based on what your job obligations are. Don't get sidetracked by these grandiose ideas that are never going to play out, because all these grandiose ideas are being played out and they're being purchased by companies who are taking money from you, not bringing money and wealth and value to your community. Like, that's my whole thing. Like, understand this. Like, seriously, I don't care, because we work on percentages. So out here, the median sales price for a house in Vacaville, California is probably at $525,000. If I were to drive 15 minutes away and go to, San Jose or San Francisco, the median sales price for a house is going to be $2 to $3 million for the same house out here. If I go to Festus, Missouri, which is right next to you, the median sales price for a house is going to be $75,000 to $85,000. It doesn't matter if it's $85,000 or $850,000. You're getting paid a percentage on what you're selling, and that percentage is going to allow you to live comfortably in that community. Go out there as a local real estate agent and do your best to get 2 or 3 buyers and 2 or 3 sellers every single month. If you do that, you're going to be able to buy the biggest house in in your community, and you're going to be able to live a really comfortable life. And you're going to be able to do that understanding that you're helping people. You're not strip mining them. Don't look at technology necessarily as being the solution. Let's go back to the basics on this. Let's go micro and everybody goes macro. Don't deal with the rocket mortgages or the realtor.coms. Work with a local lender and try to be great in your local community. And if you do a great job at that, you're going to live a real happy and healthy lifestyle.
Amen. Amen. Which is a perfect segue to talk about this topic that you guys talked about on the National Real Estate Post today, which is the millennials are ripe for picking right now. What does that headline mean in a summarized version?
Well, millennials, I mean, boy, if there has ever been a group that's been put underneath a microscope more than millennials and trying to figure out what in the hell they're doing, I don't know who it is. Like, what are they doing right now? I mean, what are they doing? Here's what it turns out to be. Millennials are certainly interested in buying and selling homes. That's definitely a part of the whole thing. They are, but in fact, they're not being serviced in the way that they necessarily want to be serviced. And I actually want to take a different angle rather than our show on this, is I think that realtors locally and lenders locally need to be marketing millennials the same way they would anybody else. Because when it comes down to it, after 10 years of being scrutinized, it turns out that they're pretty much just like everybody else. So go out there and use them as part of your database. Here's kind of the interesting story about this, is the baby boomers, which is the largest generation, they are kind of being pushed out right now. Over the next 5 or 6 years, we're going to see a whole bunch of properties and opportunities, like it or not. They're staying in their houses very begrudgingly. But the truth of the matter is as much, and I don't say this like from a marketing standpoint, because my parents happen to be, the baby boomers generation, and nobody loves their mother more than I do. But in fact, she's got a shelf life on her, as do all of our parents right now. There's going to be a lot of opportunities. And it turns out that these millennials are very interested in moving out and buying some of these properties right now. So from a realtor's standpoint, and a very tactical standpoint, we need to be looking at them and marketing them, and market them in the same way that you're marketing everybody else. I mean, there is no difference. I mean, there are millennials out there who'd rather like have a conversation on the phone. There are millennials out there who would like to be spoken with via text or instant messaging, like all the vast means of communications that we have at our band, at our disposal right now. We need to be going out there and talking to them, because outside of the boomer generation, which is on the way out, because the average age of a boomer is going to be about 78 years right now. As old as Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the two presidential candidates that we have right now. That is the baby boomer generation, and they have got one foot in the pool, if you know what I'm talking about. And as they start to fall off the cliff and go into eternity, the ones who are going to fill those seats in terms of properties and loans that need to be made are going to be the millennial generation, who happens to be the second largest generation or group of people outside of the baby boomers. And so we collectively as an industry, we really need to start marketing these people more effectively. And I'll tell you this right now. Sometimes in life, you just have to run at it. You know, it's like, well, what's the most effective means? I mean, realtors will say this, lenders will say, well, how do I do it? These millennials happen to be crazy. They're not crazy. They're just like you and me. And here's the whole approach. Don't allow yourself to get to a point of marketing paralysis. Okay. Should I do X or Y? Because you can't decide on X or Y will put you in a position of paralysis to where you don't do anything. Don't allow that to happen. Do X or Y, or do X and Y, and do them as effectively as you can. And from a marketing standpoint for a realtor or a lender, here's the whole thing. Maybe you decide that I'm going to take action, and action happens to be, imperfect action happens to be the most important thing that you can do. I don't care if it's X or Y, do one or the other. You have to do them, or do X and Y, it doesn't matter. And perhaps you're not good at X or Y, but you do either one of them or you do both of them. Here's the whole point. Any endeavor that happens to be part of marketing, which is your job description as a realtor or lender, if you do either and or, you will get better at either and or both through repetition. You're looking for scripts, you're looking for technology, you're looking for all these handicaps to help you out in your marketing. The best thing that you can do as a realtor or lender is just to pick this thing up and just start working with this and start talking to people. And through the action of conversation and communication, your conversation and communication will improve. It can only improve even if you screw the first few phone calls or communications up. It is the process that is your best friend.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that you mentioned it, the whole marketing piece, they don't teach you that when you get your realtor license. In fact, most brokers don't do a very good job of teaching you marketing as well. They teach you more of the tried and true strategies like calling expireds and door knocking, which work. But when it comes to marketing, I think this is critical, Brian, in the sense that you said, it's no different than how you market to your other clients. I do actually think it's a little bit different. It's definitely more digital. I think your presence digitally is far more important to that generation than it is to the older generations. That's a fact. But you're right. A lot of millennials, it's not that every millennial just wants to text or just wants to snap or doesn't ever want to talk on the phone or doesn't ever want to meet in person. That's not necessarily the truth. And so being diverse with your marketing and being visible, just like a billboard was, just like a park, a bus stop bench, just like a grocery store cart, now it's digital. And so having a larger presence digitally is going to make you more known, which will create more opportunities for you.
I completely agree with you. Completely 100%. But we're not dealing with an industry of salespeople, the 1.5 million real estate agents who are deciding between two tech-based platforms to work from and then running after each one of them. We're dealing with paralysis. We're dealing with an industry that is not jumping into the X or the Y, the either or the or. It is the proverb of the donkey who's got two piles of hay to eat from and starves to death because he can't figure out which one he wants to start with. Like, that's what we're dealing with. It's a matter of execution at this point. And all I'm suggesting is, I'm not saying that there are certain things that are more effective than other things that you can do. I'm saying that we're dealing with an industry of paralysis who's not doing either one of them. And I'm saying that doing anything is better than doing nothing. True. Now, when it comes down to being a real estate agent or a mortgage lender, and I don't know how this works in other states, but I very clearly remember learning about George Washington as a surveyor and bounds and metrics about how a rock could become a point on a property. And I don't know how understanding George Washington, our first president, happened to be a surveyor is going to help me get somebody in the 21st century, find a buyer or a seller, and do what my obligation is to do, which is to compel somebody to make a decision that's going to be in their best interest, which is by definition what a salesperson or what a real estate agent or lender should be doing. Like understanding the whole idea of metrics and bounds and the history of George Washington as a surveyor, it doesn't help me. So when we get into real estate and lending, we have an understanding of how we got here, but it doesn't tell us what the very core of our position needs to be. And the very core as a real estate agent or a lender they need to understand that it's sales and compelling somebody to do something in their best interest is what we need to do. And I've said this a million times, and this might ruffle the feathers of some real estate agents and lenders out there, but I have a very, very smart 13-year-old daughter who I love to death. Her name is Quinn Stevens. She's awesome. And here's what I can tell you. When she was 8 years old, she could fill out a real estate contract that I could buy at Staples for 98 cents. And she could also go on to, Lending QB or any one of these 1003 mortgage application LOSs, and she could fill that out at the age of 9 and do it effectively. How do I know this? Because she plays video games, and they're much more complicated than filling out a real estate contract or filling out a 1003 as a lender. Your job is not to fill out that 1003. Your job is to find the best product and go out there and convince people to do things that are not only in their personal best interest, but also in your community's best interest. And that second tier is something that we're learning as we find these insidious tech companies who are coming in and trying to make our industry an assembly line that's going to strip mine our communities of their wealth. Yeah,
100% agree. Now, you left one piece out from your guys' conversation on NREP was that educating the millennial generation that when you read these articles that you guys were citing, that you don't necessarily need 60-something thousand down, which is the national average for down payment, right? That there are options with FHA and USDA and VA and down payment assistance. That, I think, is probably more critical than anything is building marketing around that.
Again, get away from the contract, get away from the 1003. Let's go down to the bare basics of things. You have Realtor Magazine. Realtor freaking Magazine. And in the course of reading this article, they said a couple of things. They said, well, we did a survey of people, and they thought you needed $63,700 to put down on a house, and they didn't have the money, and they don't even have a down payment, so they're not going to buy a house. I'm like, anywhere in this survey, did you happen to tell these people you don't need that? I mean, it's mind-boggling that an advocacy publication for our industry didn't have the sales wherewithal to make that part of what their article is going to be. After all, it could be a realtor who's new to the game, a realtor who's thinking of getting into the game, or a client who knows nothing about it who runs across this and says, shit, I don't have $67,000. I'm not going to buy a house. Nowhere in the article does it state that you don't need to have that. Now, when you look at the $60-something thousand that they were talking about, that really comes down to about 20% for your average sales price across the country. It might not be your market, but when you take every house and divide it by the number of houses, you can figure out what the average sales price for a house is going to be, and it's going to be around $300,000. So when you hear the term $67,000 or $63,000, it really comes down to 20%. And the article doesn't do anything to dispel the whole myth that you don't need 20% to put down. In fact, right now, as we sit here, and it's been this way for the past 3 generations, is that your average person who's thinking about buying a house still has a misconception that you need to have 20% down in order to buy a house. Now, let me tell you this. I want to go to, the Palladium. I want to go to, I want to go to some place, a dance hall. If I have to go to Studio 54 and it's going to cost me $45,000 to get in, I don't have $45,000. So all of a sudden, I don't care about Studio 54 anymore. It just doesn't even matter to me because I cannot afford the price of admission. Therefore, I'm going to take my limited funds and I'm going to look at other things that I could possibly do. So if your average renter thinks it takes $63,000 to buy a house, and we know that your average person doesn't have that, well, they're going to not think about buying a house. And if 50% of the people right now who are currently renting think that it requires 20% down to get the ticket for the price of admission, well, then we are misleading the vast majority of people outside of home ownership. And in fact, the article from Realtor Magazine goes on to say, and this is the part that really kind of peeved me and Frank. We sat down and spoke about this for the vast majority of last Friday. They go on to say, well, there are loans that you can have 0 to 5% to put down, but the terms of these loans are going to not be very good. They're kind of going to be bad. When in fact, an FHA loan is a great loan. A VA loan is a great loan.
Yeah.
USDA loan is a great loan. You're borrowing somebody else's money at a rate that's going to be, in the 3%. Now, let me ask you this. So what do you have in your savings account right now? How much money do you have? Give me a number.
You're asking me. Let's say 10,000.
Okay. So I got my friend, his name is Cletus. And Cletus, he's never borrowed $10,000. And well, in fact, he's not really responsible with his money. In fact, if you pull his credit report, he's going to have missed 3 payments on 3 different things in the past 24 months. But he really needs 10 grand. Are you going to give him your 10 grand? Okay. Are you going to do it? And oh, by the way, for the risk that you're going to assume for my cousin Cletus, I'm going to give you a rate of return of 3%, which is going to be nothing.
Yep.
Are you going to give your personal 10 grand to my friend Cletus, and get a rate of return of 3%? Your answer is going to be emphatically no.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, as lenders and realtors right now, we can lend money to my friend Cletus at a rate that we wouldn't personally do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's extraordinary, the opportunities in mortgage lending right now and in real estate.
Yep.
It's extraordinary. And the fact that you have a site like Realtor Magazine that is misleading people and not telling them, like screaming at the top of their lungs off their soapbox, the opportunities that we have right now in mortgage lending is maddening to me. And it's proving more and more again that we are missing what our identity is in this industry, and we are salespeople. Like, as a realtor, if you're watching this right now as a realtor or lender, here's your job. Pin those ears back, sharpen those teeth, and go find as many people who want to buy or sell a house and sign them up. That's it. As far as it comes down with contracts and 1003s and all the paperwork, that'll all get figured out in the background. There's a lot of technology. Technology is great for that. But what we don't account for is how do you get the client in the door?
Yeah, it's true. You know what? And we've got to wrap up because we're running out of time. I think we just set the bar, the tone for the next state of the month to continue talking about this, because I feel like we need to continue talking about this.
Okay, I got one more question. This is really important.
Okay. 60 seconds.
All right, here we go. Who is the best catcher in Major League Baseball over the past 10 years?
Oh, come on. Everybody knows it's Yachty.
Dude, Buster Posey. Are you out of your freaking mind?
No way. No way.
We're talking about the batting champion, Gold Glove winner, 10-time MVP, 3-time World Series champion, Buster Posey.
He's solid. He's good. Yeah.
I know. So's Yachty.
He's no Yachty, though.
Dude, you have a great day, dude.
Good to see you, brother. We'll talk soon, man. Thank you guys for being on.
Thank you so much. We'll talk.
Bye-bye.